myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright when they come and say to you.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome along to the final press conference review of the season, which is for the Chelsea game, which is away this coming Sunday at Stamford Bridge. Newcastle secured Champions League, of course, so nothing to play for other than position in the league. Manchester United, of course, would need to drop points in Newcastle. You needed to win at Chelsea, and we could maybe nick third, but I don't think we are going to be too upset if that doesn't happen. But anyway, Eddie's press conference started with Keith Downey. No razor this morning. Keith Downey from Sky started off. He says, how are you feeling after your achievement of making the Champions League? I presume it's been a busy few days. And Eddie agreed. He says it's a great feeling. He says it's been a hectic few days. He says, but as you can imagine, for me personally, it's on to planning and preparation for next season. Says there's lots been going on behind the scenes. He says, but yeah, I've had time to be happy about it, and it was great to do it in front of our fans. Keith asked him if he'd had time to celebrate. He went, no, I genuinely am, preparing for next season, and I've had a bit of family time, of course, but ultimately preparing for next season. So yeah, typical Eddie Howe. He said, with this game at the weekend, does it give you the opportunity now to leave some out with you qualifying for Champions League? And he said, yeah, from our perspective, qualifying early has come at the right time for some people. Some people will be left out. He says Joe Linton, for example, and Manquillo will both miss the game at the weekend. We are a little stretched, and it's a good job that this game in essence didn't depend on us getting a team out, because the squad is stretched. Keith also said there's an opportunity for some players to say goodbye, maybe play their last games in a Newcastle shirt, and he said you can never tell what will happen in the future. One or two might move, he says, but ultimately we will need to keep the majority of the squad, and we want to keep the majority of the squad, which is a message which comes out in this press conference, loud and clear from Eddie Howe. Then basically, asked him about the Champions League. Is it easier for you to say it? Of course, Eddie has been reluctant to utter the words Champions League, but he says, yeah. He says, look, it is. I've attempted to say it a couple of times, and he said, I'm looking forward to when the draw is made. Aren't we all, Eddie? Aren't we all? Keith then asked him, has qualification for the Champions League given him a busier summer? There is a belief amongst the press corps that obviously, had we not qualified for the Champions League, that it wouldn't be as an exciting a window. But Eddie just says, I hope to do things anyway, regardless of what we qualified for. He says, but ultimately, we can only have a 25-man squad. We have to have a squad for the Champions League. We have to have a squad for the Premier League. He's playing it down a little bit. He says it won't be a big summer, but we hope to move in 2 or 3, he said. Keith asked him about the budget. Have you got one? He just said he hadn't had those discussions. If he had, Keith, he wouldn't say anything, would he really? And Keith then asked him if the sponsorship deals, of course, there's been a lot of rumours this week about a potential sponsorship deal being over the line. Is it critical to have those sponsorship deals in place? Will it help? Keith says, Keith seemed to feel that we would have more money if we got that in. And Eddie said, I don't think that will impact us this summer. So clearly a budget is in place anyway, regardless of that. You finished, in the top 4. You finished above 3 of the people who will classify themselves as the top 6. What does that say for your season, was Keith's next question. He said it wasn't anything that we could have predicted. It's a tough league. We face challenges week in, week out, and it's the biggest compliment that I can pay to the players, It's a massive movement and a massive moment for Newcastle United. The downside, of course, as he's already mentioned, is expectation rises. It's changed now. So, he's given himself a hard task moving forward, I think, or a harder task moving forward of that. Are you looking forward to the harder task, said Keith with his final question. He said, ask me in a few months. He said, look, we've massively overachieved. And now we have to continue to massively overachieve. And, ultimately, from our perspective, that is our biggest challenge. Andy Sixsmith was next. And he says, have you been able to sample the Champions League buzz in and around the city? And he said, not yet. People have said, am I going to go into town? He says, but I haven't yet. He says, but I'm really aware of the feeling, that the supporters are excited and looking forward to it. Andy then says, has anyone played the Champions League theme around the training ground? He went, no, I haven't heard it yet. He says, but I have had a few messages, with the Champions League music on. He's probably had the same one as we put up on the YouTube channel with Eddie singing the Champions League theme. Andy then said, is it the ability and the likability that makes this squad special? Good question, that, Andy. He says, yeah. He says, we've got both these things in abundance. It's been important. The season hasn't all been plain sailing. He says, but the mentality has never shifted. And when there's been been something that hasn't gone right, the unity has picked people and the players back up. He says, and being united has been a key for us this season. The dossiers have been mentioned many times. Eddie, of course, keeps written diaries, dossiers, call them what you will, each season. And Andy said, what's at the top of your dossier for this season? And he said, well, it goes back to last summer and to January, the recruitment. He says, the recruitment of the right players in windows, and then the unifying of the group and the commitment shown by the group. He says it all combines, and it's played a big, big part this season. He asked him, does this team have a legacy? He said, it's too early to have a legacy. We've just started this project. In the future, this legacy will take care of itself. He says, but I just hope in the future that people can say, well, this guy and this team, were totally committed to bringing success to Newcastle United. Andy then asked about Chelsea, asked him how surprised he was, where Chelsea find themselves this season. They'll finish in the bottom half of the table, of course. And how much better will they be next year? Eddie said he preferred just to answer the second part of the question and just said next season they'll be a big threat. All the players are good players. They've all had Premier League experience this season, and he expects them to come back fighting next year. Will summer be less frantic this season in the transfer window for you now that you've achieved Champions League? Andy going with the line that he feels that Champions League qualification will mean more players will want to come. From his point of view, Eddie, he just said, last year I was doing business on water slides, and he says I can imagine I'll still be having those kind of conversations on water slides this summer. He says you can never switch off during the transfer window, and I'm sure we'll be having conversations throughout the summer. Me, Dan, and the club will be conversations, day in, day out. Andrew from the BBC was next. He said, is this your greatest achievement in management? He said, I don't ever rank them. It's up there at the top of the list. But, I go back to my first season of management, keeping Bournemouth in the league. He says, I guess, time will tell as the years go on. Andrew then asked if Darren Coyle, who'd scored his first goal for Hearts against Rangers earlier in the week, was part of next year's picture. He went, he's pleased, that he scored. It's been a tough loan period. He's got some positivity there to take into the summer, but it will be another loan spell for Darren Coyle next season. Can you paint a picture of how the squad will look? Eddie said, I don't know. I just hope we've got a stronger squad. And Andrew then said, do you regret the fact that a lot of people are still painting the picture that it's all down to the Saudi owners and their money that Newcastle have been successful this season? And he said, well, look, I'd never say that it's my achievement. It's the players' achievement. He says, but it's clearly not just about the money. It's played a part, of course. He says, but I have seen teams spend a lot of money this season and not had success. I'm sure that could be weaved into some kind of snipe at Chelsea by some journalist. Let's hope not. Ever a moment when you thought the Champions League was on, was Andrew's final question. And he went, no. There was no one moment, no time at all did we speak about it. We certainly didn't speak about it week in, week out. He says, but, suddenly we started picking up results, but we didn't get ahead of ourselves. And, I think as we all know from listening to his press conferences and me doing these reviews, Eddie took it game by game. Chris was next. He says, you could finish third if the results go our way this weekend. Does it matter? And he went, yeah. He says it does, because it's worth a little bit extra in the transfer window. We can make more money. And Manchester United played well last night, he said, but it is out of our hands. He did call Manchester United. Nobody picked him up on that. I certainly would have done. Worth a few extra million for transfers, though, is the key, I guess. And Chris pushed that point a little bit, and he said, yeah, it will do, but, we're going to do our best. We'll want to try and keep a hold of some of the squad. The majority of the squad we've got. Our squad at the moment is stretched with injuries, and, yeah, we do need to make additions. His next thing was talking about the season. Can you put into words how you feel about this season? He said, well, look, day to day, you don't enjoy it. There was a lot of laughter when he said that. He says, no, he says, I don't mean it in that way. He says, it's just not a job that you can enjoy minute to minute. He says, you look back, and there are memories from this season that'll stay with me. He says, I've enjoyed the time that I've spent with the staff, the players, the owners. He says, there's been a lot of special people involved in this season. And, that's it. Chris asked him if, the players would show the respect to the fixture this weekend. Obviously they're not going to have the flip-flops on, more or less. And he said, yeah, he said, look, the players know that they've still got a job to do, and, don't expect their attitude to change. Written press was next. Damien said, did you get a greeting from the dog when you got in the other night after the game? And he went, no, the dog was fast asleep. He then asked him if the kids were happy. Of course, the family was at St James's Park for the final home game of the season. And he said, yeah, he says the lads did love it. He says they really look forward to getting out onto the pitch. He said that actually said, please don't take the goals down, because they wanted to score on the pitch. Damien then said, do you just have to get used to the criticism? He mentioned a few stories that have been written, about Saudi ownership and this, that, and the other. And he said, yeah, look, he says, we've been used to the criticism since day one. We're probably not, high on people's popularity lists, but we try to use that kind of thing to our own benefit. He says, all we care about is what the people of Newcastle think. Miles was next from the Shields Gazette. He says, was it always the idea that if you had qualified for the Champions League to get Nick Pope's surgery to his hand done sooner rather than later? And he went, yeah, that was always the plan. He admitted that he played through various dislocations, 3 or 4, I think he said. And he says he doesn't complain, he just gets on with it. So, we're delighted that he's managed to get it done, and we're hoping to have him back nice and early for pre-season. Miles then asked about Dubravka. He said he might play at the weekend, of course. So, but where does his future lie? Eddie says, I rate him highly. I hope he stays here. It's been difficult for him to get game time with Nick's performances. But, with the increased fixture list next season, there's going to be a lot of game time for him. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether that does happen. Jordan Cronin was next. He says, have you talked to the players yet? About, contracts, those who are out of contract, etc. He went, no, not yet, but, we'll be having individual conversations over the next, 7 to 10 days, and we'll be mapping things out for players and seeing how they feel. Jordan Preston with Matt Ritchie. Obviously he's had, issues with travel for family, etc. And would he be staying? And he said, look, we've had various discussions with Matt throughout the season. He's been very committed to Newcastle. And he's trained well. We want to keep him. He talked about the distance between him and his family. He said it's been hard for him, and it's been exceptionally hard for him, actually. But from his perspective, he'd still like to keep him for next season. He then asked him about Paul Dummett. Is it similar for him? And he said, yeah, look, he's trained hard. He's very fit. His attitude's been right. He's been very important in the dressing room. Would love him to extend if possible. Again, it's a conversation that they have to have with him over the next 7 to 10 days. Jordan then asked him if he'd had time to reflect on his personal journey and management. He said, yeah, sometimes you get flashbacks. He says, but then you're back in the real world. He says, it is amazing sometimes to look back on some of the highs and some of the lows. But what I do know is that the challenges in football get harder. Craig Hope was next, and he asked, and he said he'd done an interview with Dan Ashworth, and Dan Ashworth had mentioned how important trading is going to be. for Newcastle United selling players. And he said, you know, is Newcastle not a selling club anymore? And he said, you never know in football. Yeah, I'd love to keep the whole squad together, he says, but trading is important. You know, not selling your best, not necessarily selling your best players, but sometimes doing a deal which suits the player and suits your club, you know, helps the financial fair play, which has to be considered. And, you know, trading is part of that. But, you know, the ins and outs and how it's going to work, not so sure, but you surely, you know, you're not going to want to sell the likes of Bruno and Isaac. You know what I mean? I guess the point Craig's trying to make is you're not going to sell your best players. Craig then pushed him on Bruno, asked him if there'd be a new deal for him. He said, I'm not going to speak about individual cases, but, you know, all players we look at individually, and of course the club trying to protect their assets. Oscar was next, and he just said, you know, are you working with Dan and the owners, you know, with regard to the transfer window? Would you say that you're managing up? He said, I don't like that phrase, managing up. He said, you know, I consider my strengths, you know, is about building relationships, having honest conversations, being upfront with the owners and Dan and me. He says it's all about, you know, being able to have those conversations and communicating and yeah, getting your point across and listening as well. So, you know, seem to have a good working relationship at the moment, the club behind the scenes. Can you be a forceful manager? Oscar asked then, you know, more or less saying, can you force a transfer, I guess? And he said, look, we all have our own way. I've got a clear vision. I know what I need, but I won't be forcing anybody. You know, so, you know, just simply answering the question, you know, that it's a team effort behind the scenes. Oscar then said, can you focus on top targets now because you've qualified with the Champions League? And he went, yeah, to a point, yes. But we've got challenges. Of course, it makes us more attractive to potential players, but there's always obstacles or blockages in the road. Sometimes you might want a player, but the player doesn't want to move, or sometimes you may want a player and the club don't want the player to move, or there could be, you know, he let the journalists now speculate. It could be financial, it could be this, it could be that, wages, you name it. But yeah, that's what he means by blockages in the road. Scott was next. He decided to go down the route of Callum Wilson. He said it's the last year of his contract next season. He'd be 32 under the previous ownership. He wouldn't have got a new contract. Do you think that might be different under you? He just reiterated what he said previously. We view every player individually. We make the best call for each player, and we won't be discussing individuals, you know, with the press. Could you make an argument, he then said, with regards to retaining certain 30-year-old players who bring, you know, are still bringing their A game, I guess, and still bringing a lot to the club? Again, he just said, all depends on individuals. You know, some players can add value in their 30s, but, you know, some maybe don't. He then asked him about Hayden and Hendrick. Would they be back for pre-season? They're still contracted, of course, at Newcastle. Or would they be back and training with the 23s? He said, look, we had the conversations with those players last time. They trained separately. It won't change. They've been good servants to the club. We respect them. But sometimes you've got to make a clear break. So no chance of Jeff Hendrick or Isaac Hayden having a future at Newcastle. Luke Edwards was next. What do you need to do with the team, he said. Again, trying to find out any names that may be potentially going into Newcastle. He just said, I'm not telling you. A lot of laughter. And then he just said, look, I've got a clear vision. We've got to work in a discreet way. There's certain areas in the team that aren't strong in depth, and those are the ones where we're hoping to, you know, improve. Have you stressed those positions with the people above you? Was Luke's next question. And he went, yeah. He says, there are certain positions that if we'd suffered injuries this season, we would have been in trouble. So, yeah, you know, from our perspective, we know what we want, and, you know, we hope to get it. Luke then said, you're going to need a sizable budget then. Eddie agreed. He said, good players don't come cheap. What the amount is, I don't know, but it will need to be within the financial fair play guidelines. We work well within them, and we will continue to do so. Kieran then said, the window never always pans out the way you expect it to, but how excited are you about this window? Eddie said it didn't last year. You know, it didn't work out as I imagined it would, but when it closed, you know, I was very happy. So, you know, this window will be the hardest, he said. Are you looking for players with Premier League and Champions League experience? Kieran asked, and he said, not every player ticks every box. You don't need to have played in a competition to be good at it. So no, not necessarily. Lee Ryder was next, and he basically said, have you got any players ready to bring in? And he went, no, nothing's done, nothing's signed off, nothing's completed. But ideally, you want to bring players in for pre-season, but it doesn't always happen. Look what happened with Isaac. He came in late. Do you have names in mind, and are any of the names in your mind what the fans would call marquee signings? Was Lee's next question. Great question, Lee. He said, yeah. He says, we've got players that would love to bring in that are in that bracket, but it's not in my mind thinking that we need to bring in a marquee signing. And last question of the press conference from Lee Ryder was, how important is the USA tour going to be for team bonding? And he said, very important. He says, I thought Austria last year was amazing. The surroundings were lovely. It was calm, and it gave us focus to concentrate on what messages we wanted to get across. And he just basically said, I'm hoping that the USA will be the same, and the quality of games will certainly be a good test for Newcastle United. So that wraps up the press conference reviews for this season. Hope you've enjoyed them. Certainly we'll be doing them next season. Morning, Don. Morning to Les. Morning, all. Hard to believe this is our last press conference. This is this absolutely amazing season. Don, very kind of you. Thanks for all you've done this season, Steve. We've been housebound. You've kept me in touch with what is really happening, and having friends like Les and John, Justice, Alan in the chat. My pleasure, Don. Bless you, Don. I'm in the same boat and can only echo your words. Thank you very much, Les. Good morning from Lakeland in Florida. Hi, Kevin. Hope you're well. David, good to see you. What a wonderful season. Your channel and all the chatters have made me feel really connected from 250 miles away. Thank you to you all. Plenty to go through the summer, mate, so don't worry. We'll be keeping you up to date with quite a few things. Eddie is steady, says Eric. Can't see him making many changes. I think you're probably right. Got to trust him whatever he does, says Don. Had to give up season ticket in 2004 due to family commitments. Very sad, mate. Very sad. At least you've got the chance to see the games. It's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? Eddie's the ultimate professional. Loved the press conferences, and indeed, everyone stopped and listened when Eddie spoke. So proud to have him as our manager. Andrew, I'm great, mate. Wayne, thank you very much, pal. Means a lot for you to say that as well. Trolls, I hope you're well. You'll be hoping that ASM stays in the football club. Lots of debate about that, I'm sure, coming throughout the whole summer period. And David, thank you very much for that. Thanks for your comments. I will be back tonight, 5 o'clock. We will be finished at 6:30 tonight with the three amigos. Looking forward to seeing you all then. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.